Welcome back to the Retirement Education video series. I'm Captain Pat May, the Negotiating Committee Chairman. With me today are Captain Ben Douglas, the Retirement Insurance Committee Chairman, and Captain Kevin Biggins, the Vice Chairman of our R&I Committee. Welcome, guys.
It's good to be here, Pat.
So we've discussed previously in the retirement education defined contribution plans, or better known to the pilots as DC plans. Today I'd like to do a deeper dive, talk about the advantages and disadvantages of defined contribution plans, talk a little bit about and shed some light on the IRS limits to those plans, and then we'll kind of shift focus a little bit and we're going to discuss a defined benefit plan that has characteristics of a defined contribution plan, otherwise known as a cash balance plan. So Ben, let's start off with you. We've talked about DC plans before, as we've said. Can you give us a general overview of what they are?
So defined contribution plans, Pat, have both employer and employee contributions into the plan. And so that money that goes into the plan is immediately vested. That's your money. You can take it with you when you retire or if you decide to terminate and go somewhere else. So primarily with the defined contribution plan, they're typically tax-deferred treatment. Now that's not to say that there's not a Roth option to them, but the big advantage is the tax deferment until you retire.
There's clearly some advantages and maybe even some disadvantages to the plan. Kevin, you want to shed some light on that?
Yeah, sure, Pat. Some of the advantages that Ben mentioned, I'll just repeat. And the initial one is the company contributions. They come into your name, so they are attached to you, and they're also immediately vested at the time of the contribution. So there's no chance of them ever not being for you in the future. Another advantage is that the interest and the contributions that are made and earned in the account are tax deferred until they are withdrawn at a later date. You have complete control over the investment options, and nowadays we have a brokerage option as well to invest the money as you desire within that plan through the PRSP. And also they are portable, so at retirement or at a later date, you can roll that over into another employer plan or into an IRA. Some of the downsides of a DC plan is the risk associated with it. So there's inflation risk, investment risk, and longevity risk all fall upon the participant in this plan. And also there are limits on what you can contribute, not only you, but the employer and the combination of both into this plan. We think here at FedEx having both is great. We've negotiated both a DC and a DB plan. It's especially great for those who are interested in taking more risk in their DC plan. They can do that knowing that they have a DB plan to fall back upon.
And so what I'm hearing is essentially there's two sources of money, main categories, right, that are funneling money into this defined contribution plan. One source from the company, and that's through in a non-elective deferral.
That's an employer non-elective contribution.
Okay.
One of those is the 9% employer non-elective contribution up to the IRS limit for 2020. It's $285,000.
So once we hit the 285 earning, right, that 9% contribution from the company stops.
That's
right?
correct.
And what about the pilot's contribution, their elective deferral?
Right, so there's several sources that they can put money in as well. Again, the 401k, they can put a percentage of their payroll in there. They can deduct up to from 1% to 50% of those payroll deductions into the 401k. We have two options. You can do the pre-tax option, or you can do the Roth option inside the 401k. The second option would be to do after-tax savings. So you can allocate 1 to 20% of your payroll deductions into that source. You can take that money and let it grow tax deferred as well, or you could actually put it in a Roth conversion account that's inside the PRSP, which is a part of the defined contribution plan that is offered to us. And those monies can grow tax-free as well.
Okay, so if there are pilots that are actually taking advantage of the after-tax contributions, so they're maxing out, let's say, their 401k, are there any cautions there that the pilot should consider?
There are, Pat. So if you are putting money into the plan through the after-tax savings source, you have to be careful because the employee's part goes into the plan first. So in other words, as you put money into the after-tax savings plan, if you fill that bucket up faster, you could find yourself in a position where you would crowd out that employer non-elective contribution. So you have to be careful as you try to reach the maximum IRS limits, which is also known as a 415C limit. For this year, it's $57,000 max. You have to be careful that you don't get ahead of the employer non-elective contributions. So yeah, you could find yourself in a position that could cause problems.
So Kevin mentioned the fact that we have the benefit of having both a defined contribution and a defined benefit plan. Now we know there's some other airlines out there, pilot contracts, that only have a defined contribution plan. Want to talk a little bit about those plans and what maybe some of the trends are there?
The legacy passenger carriers used to have both a defined benefit and defined contribution plan. And so as those airlines went into bankruptcy in the early 2000s, their plans were distressed, terminated, or frozen, leading them to an all defined contribution concept. And so those airlines have managed to create value and earn some of that lost pension money through the years by increasing the employer non-elective contribution of those DC plans. The problem is now they're getting near those limits. And so what's happening is there is a cause for a spillover in those benefits that's outside of the qualified plans.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, there's definitely, we see some substantial defined contributions, right? We see some out there in the industry like 16%. But they still haven't regained everything that was lost, right, when they had both defined benefit and defined contribution plans. So they're looking for alternatives and alternative avenues for those monies above that 16% or after they exceed the IRS limits. What are some of the mitigation, or is there mitigation? What tools can be used by these airlines that are trying to work in cash over the cap or spillover?
So as Ben mentioned, the amount excess that does not fit in that 16%, the excess contributions, is called spillover. And the idea is to capture that money and in any way you can, for one, and better off in a tax advantage account. So there's one of two ways currently being used by other airlines. And the first way is what we hear a lot about called cash over cap. And this is just taxable income, also known as cash over cap, that goes into that pilot's account. So it just comes in at ordinary income. And the risk there is that those monies won't be used for retirement. They'll just be spent like ordinary income is spent. Another option we see with airlines is taking that spillover and funneling it into a retiree health reimbursement account. And this is good in a way that the money comes into it without being taxed, and it can go into this account to pay for retiree health care expenses. A caution in this regard is that the IRS limits what you can spend those monies on. So they have a very specific list of publication they put out, and you must use that money to be spent in that realm, or you can't spend it at all. So some of that money could be trapped if there's a large lot of money, more than you need. The key is in both these plans that they capture that spillover and they're getting their full company percentage of contribution to the pilots. There's a third way being bantered about right now at an airline where they're considering making a kind of a hybrid defined benefit plan. And again, that's just another way to put in money to capture that money rather than just to be lost. So the takeaway with spillover is that the idea is to get the entire contribution amount. Currently at FedEx, if you make more than $285, it just stops, and we have no way of capturing that. And other airlines have plans where they have that in place, and it allows them to get the full company contribution into their retirement account or a different account they have set up.
So prior to the Pilot Retirement Savings Plan, or the PRSP, on the FedEx property, when we're talking about our contract, we had a profit sharing plan. Ben, you want to shed some light on that?
Sure. So profit sharing plan, the name says it all. It's sharing in the profits of the company's income. Prior to 1999, both pilot and non-pilot employees participated in this profit sharing plan. Profit sharing plans are particularly designed for retirement money. And so after the 1999 contract, we were removed from the profit sharing plan primarily due to the dwindling benefit of that plan. So we moved from the profit sharing plan to the money purchase pension plan. And so the profit sharing plan is not a consistent benefit. And so the money purchase pension plan allowed us to regain those benefits that were eroding due to the profitability of the company during that time as they grew.
Okay, and that money purchase pension plan basically turned into what we know today, or is all incorporated under the umbrella of the PRSP.
That's correct. Since the recent contract, that money purchase pension plan is no longer being funded, and it's rolled over into the pilot retirement savings plan.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. You know, we've been focusing on the defined contribution, but we wanted to bring in the concept of a cash balance plan. Because it's similar, it has some characteristics similar to defined contribution plans. Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about cash balance plans?
A cash balance plan is a hybrid defined benefit plan, and it shares characteristics of that in the fact that you have a guaranteed benefit for life, like a defined benefit plan, but it's also like a defined contribution plan because it's funded by company contributions at a set amount. It's not exactly like a defined contribution plan because instead of that money going directly to you in your name, there is a hypothetical or notional account set up for each participant in the plan, and that money is credited through pay credits, usually through a percentage of payroll, and an assumed or credited interest rate. So those two components combined will add to this cash balance plan, and that will add up to a benefit that's available to the participant when they go and retire. So these plans are similar to a traditional defined benefit plan in that the assets are held in a trust and they are professionally managed. Upon your retirement, you don't have to stay in the annuity. The annuitized portion, you can actually take your portion in a lump sum with you. And just a note with that, if you decide to do that in these cash balance plans, you would be taking on the longevity and inflation risk in doing so.
So while we're on the topic of cash balance plans, Ben, we know that FedEx moved their non-pilot employees over to a traditional cash balance plan in 2008. Has that ever come up in our own negotiations for the pilots?
It has, Pat. The company did offer to keep the pilot group, those pilots that were on property in the traditional defined benefit plan, and then move the new hires over to a traditional cash balance plan without any improvements to the traditional pension plan.
The current plan that we're all under.
That's correct. The MEC didn't see a value add for having two separate retirement plans, defined benefit plans, particularly on the property.
Clearly, there's some reason to look at some of the advantages, and they did, right, back then when they evaluated it. What are some of the advantages, say, of the cash balance plan?
One of the biggest advantages is that it's portable. So you can take, upon retirement, a lump sum amount from the cash balance plan, take your lump sum, and you can roll it into another employer plan or into another IRA if you desire to do so. Another advantage is that you have a growing account balance. You can see your retirement amount and know what it's going to be when you retire, and that can be very helpful when you are planning for your retirement.
Okay, and what about some of the disadvantages, Ben?
So some of the disadvantages, the company gets to enjoy that interest rate credit that they offer in the cash balance plan. So anything above that return that is the company's win. So that's the main probably disadvantage of having a cash balance plan. Also, if you elect to roll that traditional cash balance plan in a lump sum, then obviously you're taking on all the risk that we've talked about previously, the investment rate risk, the longevity risk.
So the pilot ends up basically on that cash balance plan, assuming more risk on their side with really not a lot of upside in that transition. And they also have the same problems that we're facing today in the current traditional pension plan. And that's when you have a fixed benefit that may have been established decades ago and no cost of living improvement, you're going to be facing that same fixed benefit into retirement if you make no changes through negotiations.
That's correct, absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay.
inflation.
All right, thanks, guys. So that's a good overall summary of defined contribution plans and a cash balance plan. Why is it important to us? Well, it's important as we go into contract negotiations for 2021 to realize that there's clearly an avenue to make improvements on the defined contribution side of our equation. And we understand that there's possibly some low-hanging fruit over there in terms of what things can be negotiated. It's very easy to get conceptually an increase to the defined contribution, but we know that there's some limits out there, the IRS limits that have a real impact on our total benefit. We know that there's ways to maybe minimize some of those. So all these things will be looked at when we look at the total combined benefit package that we have as FedEx pilots. So thanks again, guys. We appreciate it. If anybody has any questions or comments for Ben's team or the negotiating committee, they can go to ftx.alpa.org, select the PDR link, and then select the drop-down for either the R&I committee or the negotiating committee and submit your questions there. We appreciate you tuning in and listening to today's video. Look forward to some more videos and podcasts in the near future. Thanks.